The Mabinogion. Chapter 4. Geraint the son of Urban. Arthur was accustomed to hold his court at Caerleon upon Usk, and there he held it 7 Easters and 5 Christmases. And once upon a time he held his court there at Whitsuntide. For Caerleon was the place most easy of access in his dominions, both by sea and by land. And there were assembled 9 crowned kings, who were his tributaries, and likewise earls and barons. For they were his invited guests at all the high festivals, unless they were prevented by any great hindrance. And when he was at Caerleon, holding his court, 13 churches were set apart for Mass. And thus were they appointed, 1 church for Arthur and his kings and his guests, and the 2nd for Guinevere and her ladies, and the 3rd for the steward of the household and the suitors, and the 4th for the Franks and the other officers. And the other 9 churches were for the 9 masters of the household and chiefly for Gwalchmai. For he, from the eminence of his warlike fame and from the nobleness of his birth, was the most exalted of the 9. And there was no other arrangement respecting the churches than that which we have mentioned above. Glulwood Gavelvor was the chief porter. But he did not himself perform the office except at one of the 3 high festivals, for he had 7 men to serve him, and they divided the year amongst them. They were Giarwainen and Pen Pighan and Leisuemwen and Gogifalch and Gerdnai with cat's eyes, who could see as well by night as by day, and Drem the son of Dremhided, and Clust the son of Clustvainid. And these were Arthur's guards. And on Whit Tuesday, as the king sat at the banquet, lo, there entered a tall, fair-headed youth, clad in a coat and a surcoat of diapered satin, and a golden-hilted sword about his neck, and low shoes of leather upon his feet. And he came and stood before Arthur. "Hail to thee, Lord," said he. "Heaven prosper thee," he answered, "and be thou welcome. Dost thou bring any new tidings?" "I do, Lord," he said. "I know thee not," said Arthur. "It is a marvel to me that thou dost not know me. I am one of thy foresters, Lord, in the forest of Dean, and my name is Madoc, the son of Turgadarn." "Tell me thine errand," said Arthur. "I will do so, Lord," said he. "In the forest I saw a stag, the like of which beheld I never yet." "What is there about him," asked Arthur, "that thou never yet didst see his like?" "He is of pure white, Lord, and he does not herd with any other animal through stateliness and pride. So royal is his bearing. And I come to seek thy counsel, Lord, and to know thy will concerning him." "It seems best to me," said Arthur, "to go and hunt him tomorrow at break of day, and to cause general notice thereof to be given tonight in all quarters of the court." And Erifueres was Arthur's chief huntsman, and Erilivri was his chief page. And all received notice, and thus it was arranged. And they sent the youth before them. Then Guinevere said to Arthur, "Wilt thou permit me, Lord," said she, "to go tomorrow to see and hear the hunt of the stag of which the young man spoke?" "I will gladly," said Arthur. "Then will I go," said she. And Gwalchmai said to Arthur, "Lord, if it seem well to thee, permit that into whose hunt soever the stag shall come, that one, be he a knight or one on foot, may cut off his head, and give it to whom he pleases, whether to his own ladylove or to the lady of his friend." "I grant it gladly," said Arthur. "And let the steward of the household be chastised, if all are not ready tomorrow for the chase." And they passed the night with songs, and diversions, and discourse, and ample entertainment. And when it was time for them all to go to sleep, they went. And when the next day came, they arose, and Arthur called the attendants who guarded his couch. And these were 4 pages, whose names were Caternerth the son of Porthorgandwi, and Ambru the son of Bedwar, and Amhar the son of Arthur, and Goriu the son of Custanan. And these men came to Arthur and saluted him, and arrayed him in his garments. And Arthur wondered that Guinevere did not awake, and did not move in her bed. And the attendants wished to awaken her. "Disturb her not," said Arthur, "for she had rather sleep than go to see the hunting." Then Arthur went forth, and he heard 2 horns sounding, one from near the lodging of the chief huntsman, and the other from near that of the chief page. And the whole assembly of the multitudes came to Arthur, and they took the road to the forest. And after Arthur had gone forth from the palace, Guinevere awoke, and called to her maidens, and apparelled herself. "Maidens," said she, "I had leave last night to go and see the hunt. Go one of you to the stable, and order hither a horse such as a woman may ride. And one of them went, and she found but 2 horses in the stable, and Guinevere and one of her maidens mounted them, and went through the Usk, and followed the track of the men and the horses. And as they rode thus, they heard a loud and rushing sound, and they looked behind them, and beheld a knight upon a hunter foal of mighty size. And the rider was a fair-haired youth, bare-legged, and of princely mien, and a golden-hilted sword was at his side, and a robe and a surcoat of satin were upon him, and 2 low shoes of leather upon his feet. And around him was a scarf of blue-purple, at each corner of which was a golden apple. And his horse stepped stately and swift and proud. And he overtook Guinevere and saluted her. "Heaven prosper thee, Geraint," said she. "I knew thee when first I saw thee just now, and the welcome of heaven be unto thee. And why didst thou not go with thy lord to hunt?" "Because I knew not when he went," said he. "I marvel too," said she, "how he could go unknown to me." "Indeed, lady," said he, "I was asleep and knew not when he went. But thou, O young man, art the most agreeable companion I could have in the whole kingdom, and it may be that I shall be more amused with the hunting than they. For we shall hear the horns when they sound, and we shall hear the dogs when they are let loose and begin to cry." So they went to the edge of the forest, and there they stood. "From this place," said she, "we shall hear when the dogs are let loose." And thereupon they heard a loud noise, and they looked towards the spot whence it came. And they beheld a dwarf riding upon a horse, stately and foaming and prancing and strong and spirited. And in the hand of the dwarf was a whip. And near the dwarf they saw a lady upon a beautiful white horse, of steady and stately pace. And she was clothed in a garment of gold brocade. And near her was a knight upon a war-horse of large size, with heavy and bright armor both upon himself and upon his horse. And truly they never before saw a knight, or a horse or armor of such remarkable size. And they were all near to each other. "Geraint," said Guinevere, "knowest thou the name of that tall knight yonder?" "I know him not," said he. "And the strange armor that he wears prevents my either seeing his face or his features." "Go, maiden," said Guinevere, "and ask the dwarf who that knight is." Then the maiden went up to the dwarf, and the dwarf waited for the maiden, when he saw her coming towards him. And the maiden inquired of the dwarf who the knight was. "I will not tell thee," he answered. "Since thou art so churlish as not to tell me," said she, "I will ask him himself." "Thou shalt not ask him, by my faith," said he. "Wherefore?" said she. "Because thou art not of honor sufficient to befit thee to speak to my lord." Then the maiden turned her horse's head towards the knight, upon which the dwarf struck her with the whip that was in his hand across the face and the eyes, until the blood flowed forth. And the maiden, through the hurt she received from the blow, returned to Guinevere, complaining of the pain. "Very rudely has the dwarf treated thee," said Geraint. "I will go myself to know who the knight is." "Go," said Guinevere, and Geraint went up to the dwarf. "Who is yonder knight?" said Geraint. "I will not tell thee," said the dwarf. "Then will I ask him himself," said he. "That wilt thou not, by my faith," said the dwarf. "Thou art not honorable enough to speak with my lord," said Geraint. "I have spoken with men of equal rank with him." And he turned his horse's head towards the knight. But the dwarf overtook him, and struck him as he had done the maiden, so that the blood colored the scarf that Geraint wore. Then Geraint put his hand upon the hilt of his sword, but he took counsel with himself, and considered that it would be no vengeance for him to slay the dwarf, and to be attacked unarmed by the armed knight, so he returned to where Guinevere was. "Thou hast acted wisely and discreetly," said she. "Lady," said he, "I will follow him yet with thy permission, and at last he will come to some inhabited place, where I may have arms either as a loan or for a pledge, so that I may encounter the knight." "Go," said she, "and do not attack him until thou hast good arms, and I shall be very anxious concerning thee, until I hear tidings of thee." "If I am alive," said he, "thou shalt hear tidings of me by tomorrow afternoon." And with that he departed. And the road they took was below the palace of Caerleon, and across the ford of the Usk. And they went along a fair and even and lofty ridge of ground until they came to a town, and at the extremity of the town they saw a fortress and a castle. And they came to the extremity of the town. And as the knight passed through it, all the people arose, and saluted him and bade him welcome. And when Geraint came into the town, he looked at every house, to see if he knew any of those whom he saw. But he knew none, and none knew him to do him the kindness to let him have arms either as a loan or for a pledge. And every house he saw was full of men, and arms and horses. And they were polishing shields, and burnishing swords, and washing armor, and shoeing horses. And the knight and the lady, and the dwarf rode up to the castle that was in the town, and every one was glad in the castle. And from the battlements and the gates they risked their necks, through their eagerness to greet them, and to show their joy. Geraint stood there to see whether the knight would remain in the castle, and when he was certain that he would do so, he looked around him. And at a little distance from the town he saw an old palace in ruins, wherein was a hall that was falling to decay. And as he knew not anyone in the town, he went towards the old palace. And when he came near to the palace, he saw but one chamber, and a bridge of marble stone leading to it. And upon the bridge he saw sitting a hoary-headed man, upon whom were tattered garments. And Geraint gazed steadfastly upon him for a long time. Then the hoary-headed man spoke to him. "Young man," he said, "wherefore art thou thoughtful?" "I am thoughtful," said he, "because I know not where to go tonight." "Wilt thou come forward this way, chieftain?" said he, "and thou shalt have of the best that can be procured for thee." So Geraint went forward, and the hoary-headed man preceded him into the hall. And in the hall he dismounted, and he left there his horse. Then he went on to the upper chamber with the hoary-headed man. And in the chamber he beheld an old decrepit woman, sitting on a cushion, with old tattered garments of satin upon her. And it seemed to him that he had never seen a woman fairer than she must have been, when in the fullness of youth. And beside her was a maiden, upon whom were a vest and a veil, that were old, and beginning to be worn out. And truly, he never saw a maiden more full of comeliness, and grace, and beauty than she. And the hoary-headed man said to the maiden, "There is no attendant for the horse of this youth but thyself." "I will render the best service I am able," said she, "both to him and to his horse." And the maiden disarrayed the youth, and then she furnished his horse with straw and with corn. And she went to the hall as before, and then she returned to the chamber. And the hoary-headed man said to the maiden, "Go to the town," said he, "and bring hither the best that thou canst find both of food and of liquor." "I will gladly, lord," said she. And to the town went the maiden. And they conversed together while the maiden was at the town. And, behold, the maiden came back, and a youth with her, bearing on his back a costrell full of good purchased mead, and a quarter of a young bullock. And in the hands of the maiden was a quantity of white bread, and she had some manchet bread in her veil, and she came into the chamber. "I could not obtain better than this," said she, "nor with better should I have been trusted." "It is good enough," said Geraint. And they caused the meat to be boiled. And when their food was ready, they sat down. And it was on this wise. Geraint sat between the hoary-headed man and his wife, and the maiden served them. And they ate and drank. And when they had finished eating, Geraint talked with the hoary-headed man, and he asked him in the first place, to whom belonged the palace that he was in. "Truly," said he, "it was I that built it, and to me also belonged the city and the castle which thou sawest." "Alas," said Geraint, "how is it that thou hast lost them now?" "I lost a great earldom as well as these," said he, "and this is how I lost them. I had a nephew, the son of my brother, and I took his possessions to myself. And when he came to his strength, he demanded of me his property, but I withheld it from him. So he made war upon me, and wrested from me all that I possessed." "Good sir," said Geraint, "wilt thou tell me wherefore came the knight, and the lady, and the dwarf, just now into the town, and what is the preparation which I saw, and the putting of arms in order?" "I will do so," said he. "The preparations are for the game that is to be held tomorrow by the young earl, which will be on this wise. In the midst of a meadow which is here, 2 forks will be set up, and upon the 2 forks a silver rod, and upon the silver rod a sparrowhawk, and for the sparrowhawk there will be a tournament. And to the tournament will go all the array thou didst see in the city, of men, and of horses, and of arms. And with each man will go the lady he loves best, and no man can joust for the sparrowhawk, except the lady he loves best be with him. And the knight that thou sawest has gained the sparrowhawk these 2 years. And if he gains it the 3rd year, they will, from that time, send it every year to him, and he himself will come here no more. And he will be called the Knight of the Sparrowhawk from that time forth. Sir, said Geraint, what is thy counsel to me concerning this knight, on account of the insult which I received from the dwarf, and that which was received by the maiden of Guinevere, the wife of Arthur? And Geraint told the hoary-headed man what the insult was that he had received. It is not easy to counsel thee, inasmuch as thou hast neither dame nor maiden belonging to thee, for whom thou canst joust. Yet I have arms here which thou couldst have, and there is my horse also, if he seem to thee better than thine own. Ah, sir, said he, heaven reward thee, but my own horse, to which I am accustomed, together with thy arms, will suffice me. And if, when the appointed time shall come tomorrow, thou wilt permit me, sir, to challenge for yonder maiden that is thy daughter, I will engage, if I escape from the tournament, to love the maiden as long as I live, and if I do not escape, she will remain unsullied as before. Gladly will I permit thee, said the hoary-headed man. And since thou dost thus resolve, it is necessary that thy horse and arms should be ready tomorrow at break of day. For then the Knight of the Sparrowhawk will make proclamation, and ask the lady he loves best to take the sparrowhawk. For, will he say to her, thou art the fairest of women, and thou didst possess it last year, and the year previous. And if any deny it thee today, by force will I defend it for thee. And therefore, said the hoary-headed man, it is needful for thee to be there at daybreak, and we 3 will be with thee. And thus was it settled. And at night, lo, they went to sleep, and before the dawn they arose and arrayed themselves, and by the time that it was day, they were all 4 in the meadow. And there was the Knight of the Sparrowhawk making the proclamation, and asking his lady-love to fetch the sparrowhawk. Fetch it not, said Geraint. For there is here a maiden, who is fairer and more noble and more comely, and who has a better claim to it than thou. If thou maintainest the sparrowhawk to be due to her, come forward, and do battle with me. And Geraint went forward to the top of the meadow, having upon himself and upon his horse armor which was heavy, and rusty, and worthless, and of uncouth shape. Then they encountered each other, and they broke a set of lances, and they broke a second set, and a third. And thus they did at every onset, and they broke as many lances as were brought to them. And when the Earl and his company saw the Knight of the Sparrowhawk gaining the mastery, there was shouting and joy and mirth amongst them. And the hoary-headed man, and his wife, and his daughter were sorrowful. And the hoary-headed man served Geraint lances as often as he broke them, and the dwarf served the Knight of the Sparrowhawk. Then the hoary-headed man came to Geraint. Oh, chieftain, said he, since no other will hold with thee, behold, here is the lance which was in my hand on the day when I received the honor of knighthood, and from that time to this I never broke it, and it has an excellent point. Then Geraint took the lance, thanking the hoary-headed man. And thereupon the dwarf also brought a lance to his lord. Behold, here is a lance for thee, not less good than his, said the dwarf. And bethink thee, that no knight ever withstood thee before so long as this one has done. I declare to heaven, said Geraint, that unless death takes me quickly hence, he shall fare never the better for thy service. And Geraint pricked his horse towards him from afar, and warning him, he rushed upon him, and gave him a blow so severe, and furious, and fierce, upon the face of his shield, that he cleft it in 2, and broke his armor, and burst his girths, so that both he and his saddle were borne to the ground over the horse's crupper. And Geraint dismounted quickly, and he was wroth, and he drew his sword, and rushed fiercely upon him. Then the knight also arose, and drew his sword against Geraint. And they fought on foot with their swords until their arms struck sparks of fire like stars from one another. And thus they continued fighting until the blood and sweat obscured the light from their eyes. And when Geraint prevailed, the hoary-headed man and his wife and his daughter were glad. And when the knight prevailed, it rejoiced the earl and his party. Then the hoary-headed man saw Geraint receive a severe stroke, and he went up to him quickly and said to him, O chieftain, remember the treatment which thou hadst from the dwarf, and wilt thou not seek vengeance for the insult to thyself, and for the insult to Guinevere the wife of Arthur. And Geraint was roused by what he said to him, and he called to him all his strength, and lifted up his sword, and struck the knight upon the crown of his head, so that he broke all his head armor, and cut through all the flesh and the skin, even to the skull until he wounded the bone. Then the knight fell upon his knees, and cast his sword from his hand, and besought mercy of Geraint. Of a truth, said he, I relinquish my overdaring and my pride in craving thy mercy, and unless I have time to commit myself to heaven for my sins, and to talk with a priest, thy mercy will avail me little. I will grant thee grace upon this condition, said Geraint, that thou wilt go to Guinevere the wife of Arthur, to do her satisfaction for the insult which her maiden received from thy dwarf. As to myself, for the insult which I received from thee and thy dwarf, I am content with that which I have done unto thee. Dismount not from the time thou goest hence until thou comest into the presence of Guinevere, to make her what atonement shall be adjudged at the court of Arthur. This will I do gladly. And who art thou? Said he. I am Geraint the son of Urban. And declare thou also who thou art. I am Edurn the son of Nud. Then he threw himself upon his horse, and went forward to Arthur's court. And the lady he loved best went before him and the dwarf, with much lamentation. And thus far the story up to that time. Then came the little earl and his hosts to Geraint, and saluted him, and bade him to his castle. I may not go, said Geraint. But where I was last night, there will I be tonight also. Since thou wilt none of my inviting, thou shalt have abundance of all that I can command for thee, in the place thou wast last night. And I will order ointment for thee, to recover thee from thy fatigues, and from the weariness that is upon thee. Heaven reward thee, said Geraint, and I will go to my lodging. And thus went Geraint and Earl Ynwywl and his wife and his daughter. And when they reached the chamber, the household servants and attendants of the young earl had arrived at the court, and they arranged all the houses, dressing them with straw and with fire. And in a short time the ointment was ready, and Geraint came there, and they washed his head. Then came the young earl, with 40 honorable knights from among his attendants, and those who were bidden to the tournament. And Geraint came from the anointing, and the earl asked him to go to the hall to eat. Where is the Earl Ynwywl? Said Geraint. And his wife and his daughter? They are in the chamber yonder, said the earl's chamberlain, arraying themselves in garments which the earl has caused to be brought for them. Let not the damsel array herself, said he, except in her vest and her veil, until she come to the court of Arthur, to be clad by Guinevere in such garments as she may choose. So the maiden did not array herself. Then they all entered the hall, and they washed and went and sat down to meat. And thus were they seated. On one side of Geraint sat the young earl, and Earl Ynwywl beyond him, and on the other side of Geraint were the maiden and her mother. And after these all sat according to their precedence in honor. And they ate, and they were served abundantly, and they received a profusion of diverse kind of gifts. Then they conversed together, and the young earl invited Geraint to visit him next day. I will not, by heaven, said Geraint. To the court of Arthur will I go with this maiden tomorrow. And it is enough for me, as long as Earl Ynwywl is in poverty and trouble, and I go chiefly to seek to add to his maintenance. Ah, chieftain, said the young earl, it is not by my fault that Earl Ynwywl is without his possessions. By my faith, said Geraint, he shall not remain without them, unless death quickly takes me hence. O chieftain, said he, with regard to the disagreement between me and Ynwywl, I will gladly abide by thy counsel, and agree to what thou mayest judge right between us. I but ask thee, said Geraint, to restore to him what is his, and what he should have received from the time he lost his possessions, even until this day. That I will do gladly for thee, answered he. Then, said Geraint, whosoever is here who owes homage to Ynwywl, let him come forward and perform it on the spot. And all the men did so, and by that treaty they abided. And his castle and his town, and all his possessions were restored to Ynwywl. And he received back all that he had lost, even to the smallest jewel. Then spoke Earl Ynwywl to Geraint. Chieftain, said he, behold the maiden for whom thou didst challenge at the tournament. I bestow her upon thee. She shall go with me, said Geraint, to the court of Arthur, and Arthur and Guinevere they shall dispose of her as they will. And the next day they proceeded to Arthur's court. So far concerning Geraint. Now this is how Arthur hunted the stag. The men and the dogs were divided into hunting parties, and the dogs were let loose upon the stag. And the last dog that was let loose was the favorite dog of Arthur. Cavall was his name, and he left all the other dogs behind him and turned the stag. And at the second turn, the stag came towards the hunting party of Arthur. And Arthur set upon him. And before he could be slain by any other, Arthur cut off his head. Then they sounded the death horn for slaying, and they all gathered round. Then came Catariath to Arthur and spoke to him. Lord, said he, behold, yonder is Guinevere, and none with her save only one maiden. Command Gildas the son of Caw, and all the scholars of the court, said Arthur, to attend Guinevere to the palace. And they did so. Then they all set forth, holding converse together concerning the head of the stag, to whom it should be given. One wished that it should be given to the lady best beloved by him, and another to the lady whom he loved best. And all they of the household, and the knights, disputed sharply concerning the head. And with that they came to the palace. And when Arthur and Guinevere heard them disputing about the head of the stag, Guinevere said to Arthur, My lord, this is my counsel concerning the stag's head. Let it not be given away until Geraint the son of Urban shall return from the errand he is upon. And Guinevere told Arthur what that errand was. Right gladly shall it be so, said Arthur. And thus it was settled. And the next day Guinevere caused a watch to be set upon the ramparts for Geraint's coming. And after midday they beheld an unshapely little man upon a horse, and after him, as they supposed, a dame or a damsel, also on horseback, and after her a knight of large stature, bowed down, and hanging his head low and sorrowfully, and clad in broken and worthless armor. And before they came near to the gate, one of the watch went to Guinevere, and told her what kind of people they saw, and what aspect they bore. I know not who they are, said he. But I know, said Guinevere. This is the knight whom Geraint pursued, and methinks that he comes not here by his own free will. But Geraint has overtaken him, and avenged the insult to the maiden to the uttermost. And thereupon, behold, a porter came to the spot where Guinevere was. Lady, said he, at the gate there is a knight, and I saw never a man of so pitiful an aspect to look upon as he. Miserable and broken is the armor that he wears, and the hue of blood is more conspicuous upon it than its own color. Knowest thou his name? Said she. I do, said he. He tells me that he is Idurn the son of Nud. Then she replied, I know him not. So Guinevere went to the gate to meet him, and he entered. And Guinevere was sorry when she saw the condition he was in, even though he was accompanied by the churlish dwarf. Then Idurn saluted Guinevere. Heaven protect thee, said she. Lady, said he. Geraint the son of Urban, thy best and most valiant servant, greets thee. Did he meet thee? She asked. Yes, said he. And it was not to my advantage, and that was not his fault but mine, lady. And Geraint greets thee well. And in greeting thee, he compelled me to come hither to do thy pleasure for the insult which thy maiden received from the dwarf. He forgives the insult to himself, in consideration of his having put me in peril of my life. And he imposed on me a condition, manly and honorable and warrior-like, which was to do thee justice, lady. Now, where did he overtake thee? At the place where we were jousting and contending for the sparrowhawk, in the town which is now called Cardiff. And there were none with him save 3 persons, of a mean and tattered condition. And these were an aged, hoary-headed man, and a woman advanced in years, and a fair young maiden, clad in worn-out garments. And it was for the avouchment of the love of that maiden that Geraint jousted for the sparrowhawk at the tournament. For he said that that maiden was better entitled to the sparrowhawk than this maiden who was with me. And thereupon we encountered each other, and he left me, lady, as thou sayest. Sir, said she, when thinkest thou that Geraint will be here? Tomorrow, lady. I think he will be here with the maiden. Then Arthur came to him, and he saluted Arthur. And Arthur gazed a long time upon him, and was amazed to see him thus. And thinking that he knew him, he inquired of him, Art thou Edurn the son of Nud? I am, Lord, said he. And I have met with much trouble and received wounds unsupportable. Then he told Arthur all his adventure. Well, said Arthur, from what I hear, it behoves Guinevere to be merciful towards thee. The mercy which thou desirest, Lord, said she, will I grant to him, since it is as insulting to thee that an insult should be offered to me as to thyself. Thus will it be best to do, said Arthur. Let this man have medical care until it be known whether he may live. And if he live, he shall do such satisfaction as shall be judged best by the men of the court, and take thou sureties to that effect. And if he die, too much will be the death of such a youth as Edurn for an insult to a maiden. This pleases me, said Guinevere. And Arthur became surety for Edurn, and Caradoc the son of Elelwyr, Gwalog the son of Lenog, and Owain the son of Nud, and Gwalchmai, and many others with them. And Arthur caused Morgantud to be called to him. He was the chief physician. Take with thee Edurn the son of Nud, and cause a chamber to be prepared for him, and let him have the aid of medicine as thou wouldst do unto myself, if I were wounded, and let none into his chamber to molest him, but thyself and thy disciples to administer to him remedies. I will do so gladly, Lord, said Morgantud. Then said the steward of the household, Whither is it right, Lord, to order the maiden? To Guinevere and her handmaidens, said he. And the steward of the household so ordered her. Thus far concerning them. The next day came Geraint towards the court, and there was a watch set on the ramparts by Guinevere, lest he should arrive unawares. And one of the watch came to the place where Guinevere was. Lady, said he, methinks that I see Geraint and the maiden with him. He is on horseback, but he has his walking gear upon him, and the maiden appears to be in white, seeming to be clad in a garment of linen. Assemble all the women, said Guinevere, and come to meet Geraint to welcome him and wish him joy. And Guinevere went to meet Geraint and the maiden. And when Geraint came to the place where Guinevere was, he saluted her. Heaven prosper thee, said she, and welcome to thee, and thy career has been successful, and fortunate, and resistless, and glorious. And heaven reward thee, that thou hast so proudly caused me to have retribution. Lady, said he, I earnestly desire to obtain thee satisfaction according to thy will, and, behold, here is the maiden through whom thou hadst thy revenge. Verily, said Guinevere, the welcome of heaven be unto her, and it is fitting that we should receive her joyfully. Then they went in and dismounted. And Geraint came to where Arthur was and saluted him. Heaven protect thee, said Arthur, and the welcome of heaven be unto thee. And since Edurn the son of Nud has received his overthrow and wounds from thy hands, thou hast had a prosperous career. Not upon me be the blame, said Geraint. It was through the arrogance of Edurn, the son of Nud himself, that we were not friends. I would not quit him until I knew who he was, and until the one had vanquished the other. Now, said Arthur, where is the maiden for whom I heard thou didst give challenge? She is gone with Guinevere to her chamber. Then went Arthur to see the maiden. And Arthur and all his companions, and his whole court, were glad concerning the maiden. And certain were they all, that had her array been suitable to her beauty, they had never seen a maid fairer than she. And Arthur gave away the maiden to Geraint. And the usual bond made between two persons was made between Geraint and the maiden, and the choicest of all Guinevere's apparel was given to the maiden. And thus arrayed, she appeared comely and graceful to all who beheld her. And that day and that night were spent in abundance of minstrelsy, and ample gifts of liquor, and a multitude of games. And when it was time for them to go to sleep, they went. And in the chamber where the couch of Arthur and Guinevere was, the couch of Geraint and Enid was prepared. And from that time she became his bride. And the next day Arthur satisfied all the claimants upon Geraint with bountiful gifts. And the maiden took up her abode in the palace. And she had many companions, both men and women, and there was no maiden more esteemed than she in the island of Britain. Then spake Guinevere. Rightly did I judge, said she, concerning the head of the stag, that it should not be given to any until Geraint's return. And, behold, here is a fit occasion for bestowing it. Let it be given to Enid the daughter of Ynwywl, the most illustrious maiden. and I do not believe that any will begrudge it her, for between her and everyone here there exists nothing but love and friendship. Much applauded was this by them all, and by Arthur also. And the head of the stag was given to Enid. And thereupon her fame increased, and her friends thenceforward became more in number than before. And Geraint from that time forth loved the stag, and the tournament and hard encounters, and he came victorious from them all. And a year, and a second, and a third, he proceeded thus, until his fame had flown over the face of the kingdom. And once upon a time Arthur was holding his court at Caerleon upon Usk, at Whitsuntide. And, behold, there came to him ambassadors, wise and prudent, full of knowledge and eloquent of speech, and they saluted Arthur. "Heaven prosper you," said Arthur, "and the welcome of heaven be unto you. And whence do you come?" "We come, Lord," said they, "from Cornwall, and we are ambassadors from Urban the son of Custennin, thy uncle, and our mission is unto thee. And he greets thee well, as an uncle should greet his nephew, and as a vassal should greet his lord. And he represents unto thee that he waxes heavy and feeble, and is advancing in years. And the neighboring chiefs, knowing this, grow insolent towards him, and covet his land and possessions. And he earnestly beseeches thee, Lord, to permit Geraint his son to return to him, to protect his possessions, and to become acquainted with his boundaries. And unto him he represents that it were better for him to spend the flower of his youth and the prime of his age in preserving his own boundaries, than in tournaments which are productive of no profit, although he obtains glory in them. "Well," said Arthur, "go and divest yourselves of your accoutrements, and take food, and refresh yourselves after your fatigues. And before you go forth hence you shall have an answer." And they went to eat. And Arthur considered that it would go hard with him to let Geraint depart from him and from his court. Neither did he think it fair that his cousin should be restrained from going to protect his dominions and his boundaries, seeing that his father was unable to do so. No less was the grief and regret of Guinevere, and all her women, and all her damsels, through fear that the maiden would leave them. And that day and that night were spent in abundance of feasting. And Arthur showed Geraint the cause of the mission, and of the coming of the ambassadors to him out of Cornwall. "Truly," said Geraint, "be it to my advantage or disadvantage, Lord, I will do according to thy will concerning this embassy." "Behold," said Arthur, "though it grieves me to part with thee, it is my counsel that thou go to dwell in thine own dominions, and to defend thy boundaries, and to take with thee to accompany thee as many as thou wilt of those thou lovest best among my faithful ones, and among thy friends, and among thy companions in arms. Heaven reward thee." "And this will I do," said Geraint. "What discourse," said Guinevere, "do I hear between you? Is it of those who are to conduct Geraint to his country?" "It is," said Arthur. "Then it is needful for me to consider," said she, "concerning companions and a provision for the lady that is with me?" "Thou wilt do well," said Arthur. And that night they went to sleep. And the next day the ambassadors were permitted to depart, and they were told that Geraint should follow them. And on the third day Geraint set forth, and many went with him. Gwalchmai the son of Gwyr, and Ryagon the son of the king of Ireland, and Ondiaw the son of the duke of Burgundy, Gwylem the son of the ruler of the Franks, Howell the son of Emir of Brittany, Ilivry, and Knockard, Gwyn the son of Tringad, Goriu the son of Custennin, Gwir Gwrhyd Vor, Garanaw the son of Galithmer, Peredur the son of Ivrock, Gwynlagel, went straight forward, and his host returned home. And he had only just reached his house when, behold, the greatest tumult approached that was ever heard. And when he looked out he saw 80 knights in complete armor around the house, with the Earl Dw Nen at their head. "Where's the knight that was here?" said the Earl. "By thy hand," said he went hence some time ago." "Wherefore, villain," said he, "didst thou let him go without informing me?" "My lord, thou didst not command me to do so, else would I not have allowed him to depart." "What way dost thou think that he took?" "I know not, except that he went along the high road." And they turned their horses' heads that way, and seeing the tracks of the horses upon the high road, they followed. And when the maiden beheld the dawning of the day, she looked behind her, and saw vast clouds of dust coming nearer and nearer to her. And thereupon she became uneasy, and she thought that it was the Earl and his host coming after them. And thereupon she beheld a knight appearing through the mist. "By my faith," said she, "though he should slay me, it were better for me to receive my death at his hands, than to see him killed without warning him." "My lord," she said to him, "sayest thou yonder man hastening after thee, and many others with him?" "I do see him," said he, "and in despite of all my orders I see that thou wilt never keep silence." Then he turned upon the knight, and with the first thrust he threw him down under his horse's feet. And as long as there remained one of the 80 knights, he overthrew every one of them at the first onset. And from the weakest to the strongest, they all attacked him one after the other, except the earl, and last of all the earl came against him also. And he broke his lance, and then he broke a second. But Geraint turned upon him and struck him with his lance upon the center of his shield, so that by that single thrust the shield was split, and all his armor broken, and he himself was brought over his horse's croupe to the ground, and was in peril of his life. And Geraint drew near to him, and at the noise of the trampling of his horse the earl revived. "Mercy, lord," said he to Geraint. And Geraint granted him mercy. But through the hardness of the ground where they had fallen, and the violence of the stroke which they had received, there was not a single knight amongst them that escaped without receiving a fall, mortally severe, and grievously painful, and desperately wounding, from the hand of Geraint. And Geraint journeyed along the high road that was before him, and the maiden went on first, and near them they beheld a valley which was the fairest ever seen, and which had a large river running through it, and there was a bridge over the river, and the high road led to the bridge. And above the bridge upon the opposite side of the river they beheld a fortified town, the fairest ever seen. And as they approached the bridge, Geraint saw coming towards him from a thick copse a man mounted upon a large and lofty steed, even of pace and spirited though tractable. "Ah, knight," said Geraint, "whence comest thou?" "I come," said he, "from the valley below us." "Canst thou tell me," said Geraint, "who is the owner of this fair valley and yonder walled town?" "I will tell thee willingly," said he. "Guifert Petit he is called by the Franks, but the Cymry call him the Little King." "Can I go by yonder bridge," said Geraint, "and by the lower highway that is beneath the town?" Said the knight, "Thou canst not go by his tower on the other side of the bridge, unless thou dost intend to combat him, because it is his custom to encounter every knight that comes upon his lands." "I declare to heaven," said Geraint, "that I will, nevertheless, pursue my journey that way." "If thou dost so," said the knight, "thou wilt probably meet with shame and disgrace in reward for thy daring." Then Geraint proceeded along the road that led to the town, and the road brought him to a ground that was hard and rugged and high and ridgy. And as he journeyed thus, he beheld a knight following him upon a war-horse, strong and large and proudly stepping and wide-hoofed and broad-chested. And he never saw a man of smaller stature than he who was upon the horse. And both he and his horse were completely armed. When he had overtaken Geraint, he said to him, "Tell me, chieftain, whether it is through ignorance or through presumption that thou seekest to insult my dignity and to infringe my rules." "Nay," answered Geraint, "I knew not this road was forbid to any." "Thou didst know it," said the other, "come with me to my court to give me satisfaction." "That will I not, by my faith," said Geraint, "I would not go even to thy lord's court, excepting Arthur were thy lord." "By the hand of Arthur himself," said the knight, "I will have satisfaction of thee, or receive my overthrow at thy hands." And immediately they charged one another. And a squire of his came to serve him with lances as he broke them. And they gave each other such hard and severe strokes that their shields lost all their color. But it was very difficult for Geraint to fight with him on account of his small size, for he was hardly able to get a full aim at him with all the efforts he could make. And they fought thus until their horses were brought down upon their knees, and at length Geraint threw the knight headlong to the ground, and then they fought on foot, and they gave one another blows so boldly fierce, so frequent, and so severely powerful, that their helmets were pierced, and their skull caps were broken, and their arms were shattered, and the light of their eyes was darkened by sweat and blood. At the last Geraint became enraged, and he called to him all his strength, and boldly angry and swiftly resolute and furiously determined, he lifted up his sword and struck him on the crown of his head a blow so mortally painful, so violent, so fierce, and so penetrating that it cut through all his head armor and his skin and his flesh until it wounded the very bone, and the sword flew out of the hand of the little king to the furthest end of the plain, and he besought Geraint that he would have mercy and compassion upon him. "Though thou hast been neither courteous nor just," said Geraint, "thou shalt have mercy, upon condition that thou wilt become my ally, and engage never to fight against me again, but to come to my assistance whenever thou hearest of my being in trouble." "This will I do, gladly, lord," said he. So he pledged him his faith thereof. "And now, lord, come with me," said he, "to my court yonder, to recover from thy weariness and fatigue." "That will I not, by heaven," said he. Then Guifert Petit beheld Enid where she stood, and it grieved him to see one of her noble mien appear so deeply afflicted. And he said to Geraint, "My lord, thou doest wrong not to take repose and refresh thyself a while, for, if thou meetest with any difficulty in thy present condition, it will not be easy for thee to surmount it." But Geraint would do no other than proceed on his journey, and he mounted his horse in pain, and all covered with blood. And the maiden went on first, and they proceeded towards the wood which they saw before them. And the heat of the sun was very great, and through the blood and sweat Geraint's armor cleaved to his flesh, and when they came into the wood he stood under a tree to avoid the sun's heat, and his wounds pained him more than they had done at the time when he received them. And the maiden stood under another tree. And lo! They heard the sound of horns and a tumultuous noise, and the occasion of it was that Arthur and his company had come down to the wood. And while Geraint was considering which way he should go to avoid them, behold, he was espied by a foot-page who was an attendant on the steward of the household, and he went to the steward and told him what kind of man he had seen in the wood. Then the steward caused his horse to be saddled, and he took his lance and his shield and went to the place where Geraint was. "Ah, knight," said he, "what dost thou here?" "I am standing under a shady tree to avoid the heat and the rays of the sun." "Wherefore is thy journey, and who art thou?" "I seek adventures and go where I list." "Indeed," said Kai, "then come with me to see Arthur, who is here hard by." "That will I not, by heaven," said Geraint. "Thou must needs come," said Kai. Then Geraint knew who he was, but Kai did not know Geraint. And Kai attacked Geraint as best he could. And Geraint became wroth, and he struck him with the shaft of his lance, so that he rolled headlong to the ground. But chastisement worse than this would he not inflict on him. Scared and wildly Kai arose, and he mounted his horse and went back to his lodging. And thence he proceeded to Gwalchmai's tent. "Oh, sir," said he to Gwalchmai, "I was told by one of the attendants that he saw in the wood above a wounded knight, having on battered armor, and if thou dost right, thou wilt go and see if this be true." "I care not if I do so," said Gwalchmai. "Take, then, thy horse and some of thy armor," said Kai, "for I hear that he is not overcourteous to those who approach him." So Gwalchmai took his spear and his shield and mounted his horse and came to the spot where Geraint was. "Sir knight," said he, "wherefore is thy journey?" "I journey for my own pleasure and to seek the adventures of the world." "Wilt thou tell me who thou art, or wilt thou come and visit Arthur, who is near at hand?" "I will make no alliance with thee, nor will I go and visit Arthur," said he. And he knew that it was Gwalchmai, but Gwalchmai knew him not. "I purpose not to leave thee," said Gwalchmai, "till I know who thou art." And he charged him with his lance and struck him on his shield, so that the shaft was shivered into splinters, and their horses were front to front. Then Gwalchmai gazed fixedly upon him, and he knew him. "Ah, Geraint," said he, "is it thou that art here?" "I am not Geraint," said he. "Geraint thou art, by heaven," he replied, "and a wretched and insane expedition is this." Then he looked around and beheld Enid, and he welcomed her gladly. "Geraint," said Gwalchmai, "come thou and see Arthur, he is thy lord and thy cousin." "I will not," said he, "for I am not in a fit state to go and see anyone." Thereupon, behold, one of the pages came after Gwalchmai to speak to him. So he sent him to apprise Arthur that Geraint was there wounded, and that he would not go to visit him, and that it was pitiable to see the plight that he was in. And this he did without Geraint's knowledge, inasmuch as he spoke in a whisper to the page. "Entreat Arthur," said he, "to have his tent brought near to the road, for he will not meet him willingly, and it is not easy to compel him in the mood he is in." So the page came to Arthur and told him this. And he caused his tent to be removed unto the side of the road. And the maiden rejoiced in her heart. And Gwalchmai led Geraint onwards along the road, till they came to the place where Arthur was encamped, and the pages were pitching his tent by the roadside. "Lord," said Geraint, "all hail unto thee." "Heaven prosper thee, and who art thou?" said Arthur. "It is Geraint," said Gwalchmai, "and of his own free will would he not come to meet thee." "Verily," said Arthur, "he is bereft of his reason." Then came Enid and saluted Arthur. "Heaven protect thee," said he. And thereupon he caused one of the pages to take her from her horse. "Alas! Enid," said Arthur, "what expedition is this?" "I know not, Lord," said she, "save that it behoves me to journey by the same road that he journeys." "My lord," said Geraint, "with thy permission we will depart." "Whither wilt thou go?" said Arthur. "Thou canst not proceed now, unless it be unto thy death." "He will not suffer himself to be invited by me," said Gwalchmai. "But by me he will," said Arthur, "and, moreover, he does not go from here until he is healed." "I had rather, Lord," said Geraint, "that thou wouldest let me go forth." "That will I not, I declare to heaven," said he. Then he caused a maiden to be sent for to conduct Enid to the tent where Guinevere's chamber was. And Guinevere and all her women were joyful at her coming, and they took off her riding dress and placed other garments upon her. Arthur also called Catariath and ordered him to pitch a tent for Geraint and the physicians, and he enjoined him to provide him with abundance of all that might be requisite for him. And Catariath did as he had commanded him. And Morgantud and his disciples were brought to Geraint. And Arthur and his hosts remained there nearly a month whilst Geraint was being healed. And when he was fully recovered, Geraint came to Arthur and asked his permission to depart. I know not if thou art quite well. In truth I am, Lord, said Geraint. I shall not believe thee concerning that, but the physicians that were with thee. So Arthur caused the physicians to be summoned to him and asked them if it were true. It is true, Lord, said Morgantud. So the next day Arthur permitted him to go forth, and he pursued his journey. And on the same day Arthur removed thence. And Geraint desired Enid to go on and to keep before him as she had formerly done. And she went forward along the high road. And as they journeyed thus, they heard an exceeding loud wailing near to them. Stay thou here, said he, and I will go and see what is the cause of this wailing. I will, said she. Then he went forward unto an open glade that was near the road. And in the glade he saw 2 horses, one having a man's saddle and the other a woman's saddle upon it. And, behold, there was a knight lying dead in his armor, and a young damsel in a riding dress standing over him, lamenting. Ah, lady, said Geraint, what hath befallen thee? Behold, she answered, I journeyed here with my beloved husband, when, lo, 3 giants came upon us, and without any cause in the world they slew him. Which way went they hence? Said Geraint. Yonder by the high road, she replied. So he returned to Enid. Go, said he, to the lady that is below yonder, and await me there till I come. She was sad when he ordered her to do thus, but nevertheless she went to the damsel, whom it was ruth to hear, and she felt certain that Geraint would never return. Meanwhile Geraint followed the giants and overtook them. And each of them was greater of stature than 3 other men, and a huge club was on the shoulder of each. Then he rushed upon one of them and thrust his lance through his body. And having drawn it forth again, he pierced another of them through likewise. But the third turned upon him and struck him with his club, so that he split his shield and crushed his shoulder and opened his wounds anew, and all his blood began to flow from him. But Geraint drew his sword and attacked the giant and gave him a blow on the crown of his head so severe and fierce and violent that his head and his neck were split down to his shoulders, and he fell dead. So Geraint left him thus and returned to Enid. And when he saw her, he fell down lifeless from his horse. Piercing and loud and thrilling was the cry that Enid uttered. And she came and stood over him where he had fallen. And at the sound of her cries came the Earl of Limmaurs and the host that journeyed with him, whom her lamentations brought out of their road. And the Earl said to Enid, Alas, lady, what hath befallen thee? Ah, good sir, said she, the only man I have loved or ever shall love is slain. Then he said to the other, And what is the cause of thy grief? They have slain my beloved husband also, said she. And who was it that slew them? Some giants, she answered, slew my best beloved, and the other night went in pursuit of them, and came back in the state thou sayest, his blood flowing excessively, but it appears to me that he did not leave the giants without killing some of them, if not all. The Earl caused the knight that was dead to be buried, but he thought that there still remained some life in Geraint, and to see if he yet would live, he had him carried with him in the hollow of his shield, and upon a bier. And the 2 damsels went to the court, and when they arrived there, Geraint was placed upon a litter couch in front of the table that was in the hall. Then they all took off their traveling gear, and the Earl besought Enid to do the same, and to clothe herself in other garments. I will not, by heaven, said she. Ah, lady, said he, be not so sorrowful for this matter. It were hard to persuade me to be otherwise, said she. I will act towards thee in such wise, that thou needest not be sorrowful whether yonder knight live or die. Behold, a good earldom, together with myself, will I bestow on thee, be, therefore, happy and joyful. I declare to heaven, said she, that henceforth I shall never be joyful while I live. Come then, said he, and eat. No, by heaven I will not, she answered. But by heaven thou shalt, said he. So he took her with him to the table against her will, and many times desired her to eat. I call heaven to witness, said she, that I will not eat until the man that is upon yonder bier shall eat likewise. Thou canst not fulfill that, said the Earl, yonder man is dead already. I will prove that I can, said she. Then he offered her a goblet of liquor. Drink this goblet, he said, and it will cause thee to change thy mind. Evil betide me, she answered, if I drink aught until he drink also. Truly, said the Earl, it is of no more avail for me to be gentle with thee than ungentle. And he gave her a box on the ear. Thereupon she raised a loud and piercing shriek, and her lamentations were much greater than they had been before, for she considered in her mind that had Geraint been alive, he durst not have struck her thus. But, behold, at the sound of her cry, Geraint revived from his swoon, and he sat up on the bier, and finding his sword in the hollow of his shield, he rushed to the place where the Earl was, and struck him a fiercely wounding, severely venomous, and sternly smiting blow upon the crown of his head, so that he clove him in twain, until his sword was stayed by the table. Then all left the board and fled away. And this was not so much through fear of the living as through the dread they felt at seeing the dead man rise up to slay them. And Geraint looked upon Enid, and he was grieved for two causes. One was to see that Enid had lost her color and her wonted aspect, and the other to know that she was in the right. Lady, said he, knowest thou where our horses are? I know, Lord, where thy horse is, she replied, but I know not where is the other. Thy horse is in the house yonder. So he went to the house and brought forth his horse and mounted him and took up Enid from the ground and placed her upon the horse with him. And he rode forward, and their road lay between two hedges. And the night was gaining on the day. And lo! They saw behind them the shafts of spears betwixt them and the sky, and they heard the trampling of horses and the noise of a host approaching. I hear something following us, said he, and I will put thee on the other side of the hedge. And thus he did. And thereupon, behold, a knight pricked towards him and couched his lance. When Enid saw this, she cried out, saying, O chieftain, whoever thou art, what renown wilt thou gain by slaying a dead man? Oh, heaven, said he, is it Geraint? Yes, in truth, said she. And who art thou? I am the little king, he answered, coming to thy assistance, for I heard that thou wast in trouble. And if thou hadst followed my advice, none of these hardships would have befallen thee. Nothing can happen, said Geraint, without the will of heaven, though much good results from counsel. Yes, said the little king, and I know good counsel for thee now. Come with me to the court of a son-in-law of my sister, which is near here, and thou shalt have the best medical assistance in the kingdom. I will do so gladly, said Geraint. And Enid was placed upon the horse of one of the little king's squires, and they went forward to the baron's palace. And they were received there with gladness, and they met with hospitality and attention. And the next morning they went to seek physicians, and it was not long before they came, and they attended Geraint until he was perfectly well. And while Geraint was under medical care, the little king caused his armor to be repaired until it was as good as it had ever been. And they remained there a fortnight and a month. Then the little king said to Geraint, Now will we go towards my own court to take rest and amuse ourselves. Not so, said Geraint, we will first journey for 1 day more and return again. With all my heart, said the little king, do thou go then. And early in the day they set forth. And more gladly and more joyfully did Enid journey with them that day than she had ever done. And they came to the main road. And when they reached a place where the road divided in two, they beheld a man on foot coming towards them along one of these roads, and Gwyffert asked the man whence he came. I come, said he, from an errand in the country. Tell me, said Geraint, which is the best for me to follow of these two roads? That is the best for thee to follow, answered he, for if thou goest by this one, thou wilt never return. Below us, said he, there is a hedge of mist, and within it are enchanted games, and no one who has gone there has ever returned. And the court of the Earl Owain is there, and he permits no one to go to lodge in the town except he will go to his court. I declare to heaven, said Geraint, that we will take the lower road. And they went along it until they came to the town. And they took the fairest and pleasantest place in the town for their lodging. And while they were thus, behold, a young man came to them and greeted them. Heaven be propitious to thee, said they. Good sirs, said he, what preparations are you making here? We are taking up our lodging, said they, to pass the night. It is not the custom with him who owns the town, he answered, to permit any of gentle birth, unless they come to stay in his court, to abide here. Therefore, come ye to the court. We will come gladly, said Geraint. And they went with the page, and they were joyfully received. And the earl came to the hall to meet them, and he commanded the tables to be laid. And they washed and sat down. And this is the order in which they sat, Geraint on one side of the earl and Enid on the other side, and next to Enid the little king, and then the countess next to Geraint, and all after that as became their rank. Then Geraint recollected the games, and thought that he should not go to them, and on that account he did not eat. Then the earl looked upon Geraint, and considered, and he bethought him that his not eating was because of the games, and it grieved him that he had ever established those games, were it only on account of losing such a youth as Geraint. And if Geraint had asked him to abolish the games, he would gladly have done so. Then the earl said to Geraint, What thought occupies thy mind, that thou dost not eat? If thou hesitatest about going to the games, thou shalt not go, and no other of thy rank shall ever go either. Heaven reward thee, said Geraint, but I wish nothing better than to go to the games, and to be shown the way thither. If that is what thou dost prefer, thou shalt obtain it willingly. I do prefer it indeed, said he. Then they ate, and they were amply served, and they had a variety of gifts and abundance of liquor. And when they had finished eating they arose. And Geraint called for his horse and his armor, and he accoutred both himself and his horse. And all the hosts went forth until they came to the side of the hedge, and the hedge was so lofty that it reached as high as they could see in the air, and upon every stake in the hedge, except two, there was the head of a man. And the number of stakes throughout the hedge was very great. Then said the little king, May no one go in with the chieftain? No one may, said Earl Owain. Which way can I enter? Inquired Geraint. I know not, said Owain, but enter by the way that thou wilt, and that seemeth easiest to thee. Then fearlessly and unhesitatingly Geraint dashed forward into the mist. And on leaving the mist, he came to a large orchard, and in the orchard he saw an open space wherein was a tent of red satin, and the door of the tent was open, and an apple tree stood in front of the door of the tent. And on a branch of the apple tree hung a huge hunting horn. Then he dismounted and went into the tent, and there was no one in the tent save one maiden sitting in a golden chair, and another chair was opposite to her, empty. And Geraint went to the empty chair, and sat down therein. Ah, chieftain, said the maiden, I would not counsel thee to sit in that chair. Wherefore, said Geraint, the man to whom that chair belongs has never suffered another to sit in it. I care not, said Geraint, though it displease him that I sit in the chair. And thereupon they heard a mighty tumult around the tent. And Geraint looked to see what was the cause of the tumult. And he beheld without a knight mounted upon a war-horse, proudly snorting, high-mettled, and large of bone, and a robe of honor in 2 parts was upon him and upon his horse, and beneath it was plenty of armor. Tell me, chieftain, said he to Geraint, who it was that bade thee sit there? Myself, answered he. It was wrong of thee to do me this shame and disgrace. Arise, and do me satisfaction for thine insolence. Then Geraint arose, and they encountered immediately, and they broke a set of lances, and a second set, and a third, and they gave each other fierce and frequent strokes, and at last Geraint became enraged, and he urged on his horse, and rushed upon him, and gave him a thrust on the center of his shield, so that it was split, and so that the head of his lance went through his armor, and his girths were broken, and he himself was borne headlong to the ground the length of Geraint's lance and arm over his horse's crupper. Oh, my lord, said he, thy mercy, and thou shalt have what thou wilt. I only desire, said Geraint, that this game shall no longer exist here, nor the hedge of mist, nor magic, nor enchantment. Thou shalt have this gladly, lord, he replied. Cause, then, the mist to disappear from this place, said Geraint. Sound yonder horn, said he, and when thou soundest it, the mist will vanish, but it will not go hence unless the horn be blown by the knight by whom I am vanquished. And sad and sorrowful was Enid where she remained, through anxiety concerning Geraint. Then Geraint went and sounded the horn. And at the first blast he gave, the mist vanished. And all the hosts came together, and they all became reconciled to each other. And the earl invited Geraint and the little king to stay with him that night. And the next morning they separated. And Geraint went towards his own dominions, and thenceforth he reigned prosperously, and his warlike fame and splendor lasted with renown and honor both to him and to Enid from that time forth.